The thrust of your presentation, Benjamin, sounds like China has the upper hand. Technology, certainly funding. I think the U.S., whatever the U.S. does, it will lack the funding. I mean, the fiscal constraints are very clear. You know, the U.S. Total debt is more than its GDP. That's something we also have to contend with. So this panel, we have three speakers who've not been here before, Professor Murphy, Benjamin Zawacki, and then the third is Dr. Wasana Wongsurawat. Dr. Wasana, like Benjamin, also has a book, this is a newly minted book. It'll be available at Silkworm, published by Silkworm, but available at local bookshops. It's called The Crown and Capitalists, the Ethnic Chinese and the Founding of the Thai Nation. So Dr. Wasana is a professor with us at Chula. She teaches modern Chinese history, Faculty of Arts, just across the way. And it's really my pleasure to welcome her for the first time to be on our panel. A little bit on China. You know, I was earlier in Shanghai this week. Bad traffic, really bad traffic. It turned out that Xi Jinping was in town. And when Xi Jinping's in town in Shanghai for the International Import Expo, no one knows, as I was told, where he would go, where he would stay. So anywhere he went, they block off the road. So a lot of traffic. I also got some traded information and discussion with my Chinese colleagues and interlocutors, and they're saying that maybe President Xi Jinping is running out of ideas. You know, there's a lot of domestic challenges in China. And the anecdote, the example they use that, you know, he has not invented any more new catchphrases or catchwords. So the rejuvenation, the Chinese dream, you know, running out of those catchwords. And now I was told that now his speech is a bit more routine and monotonous, sometimes rhetorical. It doesn't have the same buzz, the same zest that he had earlier. That kind of touch he had earlier back in 2013, 14, 15. So is that the case? Dr. Wasana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here. This is probably the glossiest panel I've been on this year. Very impressive. I need to come to ISIS more often. Yes. Well, Xi Jinping has been around since 2013, right? So 2012 to 2013. So this is 2019. So it's 6 years already. I don't know about the rest of us, but I'm already quite bored with the Thai Prime Minister that we've had for the past 5 years. So after 6 years, things get old, right? Especially politicians. Anyway, I will definitely talk about that in my 15, 20 minutes allotted time. I'm a historian, and that's probably why I don't get to ISIS so often, because I'm more obsessed with things in the 19th and 20th century. And so I don't get to the contemporary very quickly, but I would like to share some of my views from the historical perspective on this, and maybe it might help answer some questions. I actually I feel that I have a different perspective than some of what has been expressed by our lovely panelists. And this is, I think the core message that I would like to put out today is that the Cold War is over. I mean, there is a big danger in people talking about this China-US trade war or China-US tension, whatever thing in Southeast Asia, as the new Cold War, right? I've seen it in the media and all that. But I think this is, whatever it is very different from the Cold War. And the Cold War is over. And what do I mean exactly by that? The Cold War is over in that we only have one ideology now. And who won the Cold War? Capitalism. capitalism won the Cold War. And essentially, at the core of it, all the superpowers adhere to this ideology. China calls it socialism with Chinese characteristics, but we all know, right? It's one of the most capitalistic countries in the world, right? The US obviously adheres to capitalism. But then there's like other things to confuse us, right? Because then people say, oh no, but like the US is invested in democracy and human rights, right? And then I'm like, seriously? Really? I mean, do I have to remind you about like the multi-billion weapons trades just weeks after the gruesome murder and dismemberment of journalist Khashoggi in Saudi consulate in Istanbul, right? And then people would say, no, but that's Trump. That's because it's Trump, right? And we can't, Trump is unpredictable. And I would tell you, I despise President Trump just as much as anyone in this room. But the fact is, if the Democrats don't get out of this Cold War mindset, you're going to lose the next election, and we're going to have Trump for another 4 years, right? And the thing is that this thing about democracy and human rights by the U.S., right? It hasn't only been abandoned since Trump, right? We have U.S. drones bombing Médecins Sans Frontières in Syria under President Obama, and they did that with impunity. Nothing happened. So, and that's the worst practice since the Geneva Convention. Seriously, bombing Médecins Sans Frontières. And we don't have to talk about like the ongoing relations with regimes with one of the worst human rights records, like Saudi Arabia, places like that. And the list goes on and on and on and on. We just don't talk about it because Obama is a nice guy, right? So at the end of the day, everyone is for trade, right? So there's no real ideological competition in the world like in the Cold War period anymore. No one's afraid of the domino effect. No one's afraid of Communist International, socialism taking over the world and all that, right? So what is going on here? I would say what is driving the policies of both China and the US at the moment is the domestic issues. And let me talk a bit about China and the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think it's dangerous for us to think of the Belt and Road Initiative as somehow China trying to conquer the world, because it's not, right? Essentially, I believe the Belt and Road Initiative is very important for China, and it was brought in by President Xi Jinping to try and reverse the slowdown in the economic growth of China, which has been happening for quite some time. We've seen two-digit growth in the 90s, in the early 2000s. It has been dropping since. And if nothing has changed, China is looking like it's heading towards something Japan has been experiencing for the past 10 years, right? Like, if economic growth continues to slow down, you get to a point where it's not growing. And in fact, I would say the number one cause of legitimacy for the Chinese Communist Party's holding the power over the People's Republic of China is its ability to drive this fantastic economic growth since the open reform policies of Deng Xiaoping in the late 1970s. So if this cannot continue, if the economy is heading towards it is in the period of slowing down and heading towards the gigantic recession that people keep talking about, this would have dire consequences to the stability of the Chinese Communist government. And I believe that the biggest threat to the People's Republic of China is not Trump, is not the US, is not any external threat. The biggest threat to the stability and the position of the Chinese Communist government is within China. And that is if the economy slows down, if people are unhappy with their living circumstances, you would see protests. To put that in one word, inequality is the biggest threat at the moment, and I think economic social inequality is the biggest problem and it's very typical for newly developing industrialized countries, the economic takeoff of many other countries in Asia earlier on under authoritarian regimes, right? You would see that this problem of inequality becoming a major threat, and we see that very clearly in what has been going on in Hong Kong for months now. I would say the basic of what is going on in Hong Kong is not democracy; it is inequality. It is an economic problem which needs to be resolved, right? And we only hear about Hong Kong because that's the only place where you can the foreign press has more or less open access to what is going on. We don't know what exactly is going on in the rest of China. We only hear bits and pieces, right? So in fact, this Belt and Road Initiative, the idea is that China needs to be able to continue to expand economically and have economic growth that is back to the breakneck rate of the 1990s, right? 2 digits, right? 11%, 12%, right? I mean, who can ever imagine that? And reverse this slowdown of the economy. So whatever they decide to do, right? And I think in this Belt and Road Initiative is done so as to please the mainland Chinese general public, and it's it's domestic. It's actually very, very basic, right? Domestic politics driving in international politics or foreign diplomacy and all that. And on the side of the U.S., right? There has been news that the Trump administration is trying to wind down this trade war. And I think essentially Trump is just trying to get reelected, right? So he promised something along the lines of a trade war. So he had to get into the trade war, and then he has to make it look like he actually gained some ground and got something. And then now it's like, okay, next year is election year, so we're going to wind down with some, like, we're getting ready to roll back on tariffs and all that. You might be hearing that to get into election year. And if he gets reelected, we're going to get to see Trump-style tweeting policies for the next 4 years, right? Which would be a nightmare for a lot of us. But seriously, I think we need to realize that we're not in the Cold War period anymore. So we're not. And actually, the people that need to realize the most is Southeast Asia, us, ASEAN. We're not in the Cold War anymore, so we're not going to be competed over by, the U.S. and China. They're not going to fight over us because they're afraid that we will lose our hearts and minds to someone else, right? It's not like that. That is not going to happen. So what does that leave Southeast Asia with, right? I want to talk a bit about the South China Sea issue first. The South China Sea issue is very interesting in that, did you know that the 9-dash line was declared by the government of the People's Republic of China and the government of the Republic of China, Taiwan. Both of them declared this 9-dash line in the South China Sea, covering more than 90% of the area, since 1947. It has been out there. They have always claimed this 9-dash line since 1947. But why have we only heard of it? Why has it only become an issue recently? If from a historical point of view, and I think if we're going to be completely honest with ourselves, the South China Sea has always been a realm of influence. And it has always been a realm of influence of someone else aside from Southeast Asian nations. Okay? So during the colonial period, 19th century, I think very clearly Britain was the hegemon. The South China Sea was British realm of influence. After the Second World War, during the Cold War, very clearly South China Sea was US realm of influence. So the 9-dash line has been there for a long time, right? But through the Cold War, right, the US had the South China Sea very, very clearly under US influence, with very close allies on Formosa, in the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia, and Thailand, and all the rest of us, right? And then what happened? Another thing that happened after the Second World War, during the Cold War period, is that it's the first time that you start having modern nation states in most of Southeast Asia, right? Decolonization of Southeast Asia. And then, so you start having countries that would want a claim of the area of the South China Sea. And then you have Deng Xiaoping's open and reform policy in 1978, and China's like fantastic growth and rise in influence in the 1990s and up to the 2000s. And so I would say since the 1990s, it was the first time in many hundred years that the powers that are ruling mainland China were strong enough to really try to enforce the 9-dash line. And once they really try to enforce the 9-dash line, or really try to exert themselves into the South China Sea, then this causes problem, because by this time, you have nation states in Southeast Asia that are also claiming their territory in the South China Sea. Another issue is that the US, who had long enjoyed hegemony over the South China Sea, would also be taken aback, because this was our backyard before, even though it's a very far away backyard from the US, but it clearly used to be US realm of influence. So it's not surprising that you see people act up and be upset and all that about this China's claim of the South China Sea, the 9-dash line, since the late 1990s and up to the present day. But in reality, they've claimed that since 1947. That's one thing. So what are we to do, right? What is ASEAN's position? I think it's very important that ASEAN also realizes that it came into being as a Cold War institution. It started out on the US's side, right? It started out being anti-communist, right? And we have to realize that the fact that we've expanded and we've included our former Cold War enemies into ASEAN, that means that the Cold War is over, right? And since the Cold War is over, right, we need to, I think the thing to do is to try and diversify our allies, right? And try to keep our domestic interests at heart and not put ourselves and not play by the Cold War strategy anymore. We're not supposed to try and put ourselves on either team, right? Because and this trade war thing, what it's doing, kind of this rising sentiment that the U.S. and China are creating a new Cold War. What is happening is forcing ASEAN members to take sides. And if we take sides, right, it's easier for both China and the U.S. to dominate us, right? As if we cannot choose, if we cannot work with both, then we get back into the framework of the Cold War, and then we end up having less bargaining power vis-a-vis the superpower that we choose to ally ourselves with. So I think it's very important to diversify our allies, and I think, in fact, what we're seeing happening, two very interesting examples is Malaysia and the Philippines, and in fact I think it's very important that Duterte acts up so as to tell the U.S. that the Philippines would not unconditionally always be on the U.S.'s side, right? But how far he could go towards China is a question. And I think what Mahathir Mohamad was doing is also quite interesting, kind of renegotiating BRI plans, but at the same time coming out very clearly that we cannot go to war with China, because in fact no one wants to go to war with China. China doesn't want to go to war with other people. But I think it's important that we try to diversify our contacts so as not to put ourselves under the hegemonic powers of the superpowers, either China or the US. And I think the Thai government during the Cold War had actually done very well in diversifying its contacts. We tend to think that Thailand was very clearly, squarely under the US influence, but actually I have students working on newer documents from the communist bloc and seeing that we have had trade agreements and we have had close connections with countries in the communist bloc in Eastern Europe since the early 1970s. And at the same time, we also made contact with China as well. I think they have done very well during the Cold War, and it would be good for the current administration to try and follow that direction. Yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Watson, I'll just tease out a couple of points about the tension and inequality within China, and also ASEAN not wanting to choose sides and trying to diversify, should diversify. When we talk about US and China, remember that it's not binary. It's not like the world is only has the US and China. There's Japan, there's Australia, there's a bunch of other countries, India included. So it's a wider constellation within which ASEAN is situated. Look, I'm going to come to a last speaker who's a senior fellow with ISIS Thailand, a veteran foreign affairs, regional relations specialist, analyst, Kavi Chongkittavorn. A number of issues. I want you to cover also, should ASEAN go to the US first quarter with Trump's invitation? I know you have something to say. I know you have a good feel for what ASEAN should and will do. And then, of course, ASEAN between US, China, and the wider mix after the 14th East Asia Summit and the 35th ASEAN Summit. Of course, the US-ASEAN Summit was missing the US leader. So, Pikawi, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. I have to warn you, I'm a journalist. I do not have sophisticated and visionary views like Anne-Marie or Benjamin. I don't look back like Wasana. I only look 24 hours. What happened last week and what happened tomorrow. So I have 10 minutes. I won't take you long. I have 3 points. Already Titinan have gave you some of the salient points. Number one, talking about the invitations of Trump, whether ASEAN leaders will go, I would say they would go. provided domestic condition allow, particularly Cambodia and the Philippines. But the problem is this. To prepare for a special summit, you need more than 4 months, not the first quarter. Trump is not Obama. Obama has established a very personal, good rapport, and he invites all ASEAN leaders personally. And that is why all ASEAN leaders agree at the same time. It was arranged within 3 months in 2016. That accumulates in February 2016, the Sunnylands Declaration. That was the best American has done towards ASEAN, and Trump has destroyed it all, no mistake. And I think Trump is imitating Obama, and I think he will fail because he did not invite ASEAN by himself. He used letters, one letters to the Thai and the other letters to the ASEAN's chair, the coordinator, Laos. Actually, Laos is having big headache because Laos has to coordinate the visits during the first quarters. And who is the partner? There's no U.S. ambassadors in ASEAN, in Jakarta. Even though America was well known for having the first ASEAN ambassador in Jakarta. So that is the problem. Number two, the biggest also is that both sides have to agree on what could be deliverables. And Trump could be the first U.S. president who never attend U.S. summit in full. He went to the Philippines in 2017. Mind you, he left halfway. He doesn't care, because you know what? Because at the time, the Philippines has problem in arranging the timing, so it was a little bit late. And you look at this summit in Bangkok, during the third and the fourth, there are about 10 summits altogether. And the Thai did it pretty well because they arranged the room in such a way that the next bilateral is lined up. So there's no time waste. Just a little bit, 5 to 6 minutes. That is why the third and the fourth, they could manage the whole summit. So I think you have to still watch whether ASEAN will take up. But for the Thais, 100%, Thailand will go. Thitinan already mentioned, Thailand, actually, it was Trump who normalized the relation October 2018, and it's turned out very well. And mind you, it was the Thai who devised the so-called trio when the U.S. didn't send anyone, sent very low level, NSC, Robert O'Brien, and I think ASEAN respond well. Media reported that it was a snap. It was not. ASEAN was very gentlemanlike in response. We have 3 leaders. The rest are foreign minister. It could have been different, if Malaysia is the chair or the Philippines is the chair. While being Thais, the Thais are very nice, want to be a good chair. So, don't do it, please. We have the Thais and the Vietnamese and the Laotian, the rest are foreign minister. So the media got it all wrong. So I think Thailand and half of the ASEAN leader will go. Secondly, I want to refer back that ASEAN and US relation, as you can see, are on autopilot. Even though, untrained pilot came, still the plane took off, and ended up pretty good. You look at the joint statement on ASEAN-US summit, all the goodies are there. So, but there is one caveat. If America continued to treat ASEAN like this, ASEAN does not have to choose side. It just slowly move toward the other side. And you always ask, in this country, just the first panelist until me said that choose side. Thailand has chosen side. We are pro-Thai. Okay? So that gives you the answer already. And actually, if you notice carefully, asking about chosen side, ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. Already, ASEAN has chosen side, but ASEAN did not say so. China was unhappy with the notion, the concept of Indo-Pacific, thinking that it was a Western construct and ASEAN should not use the word. That is why ASEAN having a hard time to receive complete full support from China. And actually, it was during this private summit between Li Keqiang and ASEAN that in the end, China really accept ASEAN outlook. Because I was told Foreign Minister Don has used the same argument as Deng Xiaoping about the black cat or the white cat. Does it matter whether it's Indo-Pacific or ASEAN outlook, as long as it helps country in the Indo-Pacific to cooperate closer? So that argument fit in very well, and China kind of accept Indo-Pacific now. That is why in the joint statement between ASEAN and China, there's a lot of synergies about what will going on in the future. Now, I'd like to refer back to the outcome of the summit nobody talked about. The outcome was actually quite marvelous, not to overstate it. And without a bomb, like the previous time, I think everything was fine. By the way, just to give you how much money we paid, every Thai citizen paying 16 baht 70 satang for this the whole year summit, which covered 300 meetings. Having said that, there are two important things emerging from this summit. Number one, I think ASEAN centrality has been strengthened. We have earned it finally. Why? For two reasons. Number one, because of the RCEP. Of course, ASEAN 15, the so-called ASEAN plus the RCEP member, will wait for India next year. I think there are also media reports saying that India withdrew. No, I think India just needs some time to think. India have been thinking for 5 years, but I think it will take another year to reconsider. What is good about all these things is that India has exposed himself and it has to make a decision. The talk within ASEAN is that, India for 5 years has using the same argument all the time, but this time it's very good. So it's considered a success. At least 15 members agree on the 20th chapter. Who could believe that when it started only 7 chapter, now it's 20 chapter all complete. And in fact, talking about India, India has given a lot on several issues toward the end, surprisingly toward many ASEAN on the rule of origins on investment and e-commerce. So I think you have to give credits to India also, even though they have problems with, which I think India has to make a decision. So that much is clear. So ASEAN centrality surrounded the ASEAN FTA going beyond, including ASEAN plus 6, now turning to RCEP, waiting for India. So ASEAN centrality is stronger. Number two, ASEAN outlook, ASEAN centrality is even stronger now and its relevance. Why? Because in the end, without Trump showing up, freedom and open Indo-Pacific has not been mentioned much. O'Brien just lead from the prepared statement. It was awful. And the worst is that, his Black Dot network, he mentioned to the business forum before they mentioned to ASEAN leader. Some of the ASEAN leaders were actually very mad. So nobody paid much attention, but being America, superpower, we have to care for America. So ASEAN centrality has been promoted with ASEAN outlook, and as you can see, you have to give credits to America. Since last time, Pompeo came and quickly endorsed ASEAN outlook as if it was part of the US strategy. It was not. It was separate. It was different. There was some line of thinking narrative that this is part of and parcel of Americans' strategy. It was not, even though we share some similar approach. And if you read carefully item 10 of ASEAN Outlook, it contains 16 measures, the whole Coca-Cola apple pie of norms and principle, you name it. So ASEAN has been very wise in incorporating all the norms and principle into one guideline. So that is why it's very easy for ASEAN dialogue partner to accept the Australians, well, except the Russian, I'm sorry to say, because Medvedev thinks very strongly that we don't need this kind because there already exists mechanism. This much, it's very clear that these two things has made this summit rather successful. But there are other smaller points, you know, just the lighter side, which nobody talk about it already. I happen to get the number from the meeting is that the whole year Thailand has been pursuing sustainability and the so-called green meeting, right? So a lot of talks about how we're going to use renewable materials. There's no plastic cups. There's no plastic box. There's no single-use plastic. This is a new trend in Thailand. Thai people now is going crazy of not trying to single-use, which is a very good trend. And I think Thailand has been quite successful in launching, I repeat, in launching ASEAN as a green meeting. Just for a record, for the whole year, Thailand has saved up 280,000 plastic bottles. And also the other thing is the 250,000 forks and many other things. Having said that, I think from now on, Vietnam as the new chair has to take up some of the issues that have been left over from the Thais. One of the issues is, of course, South China Sea. I think we have discussed, but one of the key issues is this. Vietnam, as the chair of ASEAN and also as the major conflicting party with China, how Vietnam will conduct itself as a chair and also as a major conflicting party, you have to watch. But already you have seen some flavor. At the moment, there's no common announcement coming out that second readings of the first single draft will start soon. There's no official announcement because Vietnam does not want that to be announced. So you have already see this kind of maneuvering. But I can guarantee you that Vietnam will be very strategic in handle its chairmanship because the theme of Vietnam as cohesive and responsive ASEAN will echo very well because Vietnam wants to promote solidarity, the cohesiveness of ASEAN, of making ASEAN stronger. Because in Vietnam thinking, when ASEAN is stronger, it can respond very well to external pressure. I will stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Khun Kavi. I'll just tease out a couple of points before we open the floor. I think that ASEAN, next year, by the way, big year for Vietnam next year, not just the ASEAN chairmanship, but also the non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. If ASEAN goes to the US, it's going to be all 10 leaders, right? Otherwise, they won't go, you think?
No, right. I think some of them will go. I predict that if possible, all of them would like to go. You know, it's a good chance. But it depends on the situation in Cambodia and also in the Philippines. That, I think, has been discussed, pending.
Another complication, unlike Sunnylands, the situation in Cambodia has deteriorated, right? So there will be some domestic pressure in the US from Congress, perhaps. And then there's the issue of, Trump didn't come here. It would have been easier for him to come here and pursue whatever agenda he has. ASEAN goes over there. It could be kind of a bit of a trap or maybe an agenda that they don't have much control over once the ASEAN leaders go. On the other hand, if they don't go, shunning the U.S. has a big price.
Yeah, one of the arguments is that ASEAN lost its centralities when American invite us, we all go, instead of invite Trumps to come here.
On India and RCEP, I know the ambassador of India is here. I mean, for us in the region, India is a very, I wouldn't say instrumental, if not indispensable within the RCEP context, because it has the weight, and RCEP has a certain balance, with India, Japan, and then China. I think ASEAN is very comfortable with that. Without India, it will not be the same. I think India's GDP within RCEP, the overall RCEP, maybe about 11%, but the market size is 40%. So without India, I think RCEP may not be the same, and the balance might be lost. I think some countries might be uneasy with that. In addition, I think for India, I mean, to have an Act East geostrategy, RCEP would really be pivotal, to India's overall geostrategic border. If you talk about Indo-Pacific, without India, it goes back to Asia-Pacific. The floor is open now. There's a lot of issues, but I want to share some time with the floor participants. Questions, comments, you're welcome to make them.
It was a very wide-ranging discussion, and I was impressed at the breadth of the coverage of all the panelists. But one thing I thought, when you're talking about ASEAN centrality, and Kavi's very good point about how we've seen a recent possible strengthening. I think surely one of the things that really struck me recently was various actions related to Cambodia, and how there's been really quite almost an unprecedented level of cooperation, I think, amongst ASEAN countries to perhaps support Hun Sen's efforts to crack down on the opposition. And this has always been a very sensitive issue, I suppose, in ASEAN, is being involved in each other's internal affairs. So I'd be very interested in what the panelists make of that. And if I may squeeze in one other quick thing, was on RCEP and the recent, what we saw in ASEAN. And I'm not sure I quite agree with Kavi that it was a success and the Indians may change their mind. But I wonder if you think there was, it's just, the India's decision has just followed Modi's big visit to the US. And I wonder if, Trump's decision to withdraw the US from TPP has shown that TPP continued without the US, and obviously there's a big gap missing. There's a big gap there because the US is not involved, but it has proven that you can go ahead. I wonder if there's been US influence on India's decision suddenly to pull out. Anyway, that's just a thought, and it's open to any of the panel. Thanks.
And so I think they have some domestic concerns and constraints. Unlike the CPTPP, when the US pulled out of TPP, it became CPTPP. But CPTPP doesn't have China. And CPTPP have more or less kind of like-minded partners and members. But I think that RCEP without India would be very China-heavy. We have a question on Cambodia, which will, by the way, on Cambodia, we have to note that it's a very dramatic day today, tomorrow. The Cambodian opposition CNRP leader, Sam Rainsy, is supposed to make a re-entry into Cambodia tomorrow, the 9th of November. It's been planned for some time, but it doesn't look like it will happen. He doesn't seem to be able to get on a flight. He wants to enter from Thailand. I think it's very difficult to do that, and the Thai government has already announced that they will not allow that to happen. On the other hand, the deputy leader, Musa Kur, in Jakarta, gave a press conference disrupted by the Cambodian ambassador in the room, and then she subsequently went to Malaysia, detained for a little bit, and now I think flown out of the region. So the Cambodian opposition, CNRP, very much systematically denied and decimated, and this is a frustration not just for them, but I think it's an issue for ASEAN. ASEAN goes anywhere in the world now. It's a club of authoritarian-ish governments, even across the board, even Indonesia, Malaysia.
I think it was a beautiful slide about freedom and open Indo-Pacific. On one side, the good America, and on the other side, the bad China. One strike me, freedom from coercion. under the American side. What I see is in Europe, in the Middle East, everywhere, is coercion by America. And then on the other side, the debt trap of China, is it really a trap? It's a negotiation between two partners. And Mahathir cancelled one of the bad deals. So it's not, it's a bilateral thing. And the people are, the partners are free to agree to this or not. But when it comes to coercion in the financial sector, about the American SWIFT system, where Europeans are forced to abide by American laws and not by international laws.
In Thailand, we have seen that some of the negotiations for projects, such as the HighSpeed Railway to the northeast and up to Nong Khai, have been delayed because of negotiations between the Thai and the Chinese parties. And this gets back to the fact that it is a bilateral negotiation, but it also raises the question about whether some countries are being more careful or prudent as they look at these offerings from China and how that might affect relationships as China goes forward.
Thailand Rail, this is part of the China-Indochina Peninsula Economic Corridor, not the Belt and the Road, but one of the 6 corridors. There's a train plant of 607 kilometers from Nong Khai to Bangkok, and Thailand stymied. So there's a Thai way of cooperating with China by not denying or disagreeing with China, but stymieing effectively, functionally, by building just a 3.5 kilometer. Even the 3.5 kilometer project, only about 1.8 kilometers done. So essentially there's no rail in Thailand yet. But I think the pressure is coming up for that to happen because the Lao portion is being completed. It's about 60% done. So we will have a Kunming, Bangkok rail within the next 5 years, most likely. What do you think? And also Anne-Marie on the coercion question.
All right, on the coercion question, you're absolutely right. I'm certainly not going to defend U.S. policy in terms of it being consistent globally, whether it be the withdrawal of support for the Kurds or some of the U.S. interventions in Iraq, support for the Saudis in Yemen. These are things that many Americans oppose. So absolutely there are some discrepancies between the principles that great powers often use in support of their policies, and as I indicated, Free and Open Indo-Pacific was really directed against China in part to differentiate it. So I take your point. With regard to the issue of debt trap diplomacy, I mean, yes, you're absolutely correct. These are bilateral negotiations. The question is, who's doing the negotiating on the parties other than China's side, and in whose interest are they acting, right? So if we take the Sri Lanka case, the former leader wanted this port in his home province, which there was no need for this port. The existing port in Sri Lanka was under capacity. Sri Lanka had gone to India, its traditional great power leader, to seek support for it, and India declined because it was non-viable economically. The leader then turned to China, took on all the debt, a lot of it went into his pockets, and ultimately, who's left to pay for it but the citizens of Sri Lanka who didn't get any economic benefit and then have to turn it over. So you're absolutely right that these are bilateral negotiations. The question then becomes, are these negotiations done with the best interests of the countries involved. And sometimes the case is absolutely yes. Sometimes, as in the case of Malaysia with Najib and others, the answer is not. And so I think that is something that not just the US, but many countries are extremely concerned about. We clearly see that in Indonesia holding back, coming up with new rules, seeking new sovereign wealth funds to try to diversify away from reliance on China, and in other countries like Myanmar as well, renegotiating some of this. So I do think that there's a lot of potential for these deals to get much better and actually serve the interests of the citizens involved.
Yes, and Japan has emphasized so-called the quality infrastructure
Yes.
By contrast. And even the US is trying to talk about quality infrastructure now too. Benjamin, would you say that Thailand is beholden to China?
No, in fact, I would, in response to the question from the floor about the ability or willingness for certain countries to, as you said, be a bit more careful, a bit more prudent with respect to negotiating with China on BRI projects, I would say it works both ways. I mean, yes, Thailand has been more careful and more prudent, but it also has the capacity to be so. It has the ability in addition to the willingness. You take Laos, for example, and I would argue that, save perhaps for Timor-Leste, Laos has the least amount of sort of ability or capacity to push back against any kind of foreign intervention. So I think it's partly choice and it's partly ability. But I also think the other side of the equation is China and its unwillingness to go away. Right? People constantly are saying to me, you know, this high-speed rail, it's a low-speed project. It's not going to it's never going to get off the ground. But we've seen twice. Once, the first time when General Prayut was refused an invitation to the first BRI summit in 2017, I think. Partly on account, it was believed at the time for the slowness with which the high-speed rail was proceeding, and was able to achieve his invitation to the follow-up summit in the early part of this year, essentially by using Section 44 of the Thai Constitution to essentially order that the various holdups and various delays to the high-speed rail be pushed aside and the rail could at least temporarily move forward. And then this weekend, one of the headlines in the Bangkok Post a few days ago was just after Prime Minister Prayut had met with Premier Lee Ka-ching. He was ordering, giving essentially a directive to all of his subordinates that this high-speed rail has got to start moving along. And so, in some ways, you see prudency and care and pushback on the part of the Thais, but you also see a China that's being very, very persistent and knows how to flex its muscle when it has to.
Thank you very much. If there's no more hands from the audience for questions or comments, I'll just give 1 minute each to the other two speakers. Dr. Wasana, will Xi Jinping end up with a third term? Do you think he has overreached? Is he kind of losing steam?
Well, Xi Jinping will have to stay on until the BRI achieves what it's set out to do, that is reverse this slowdown of the Chinese economy. So I think that's why they extended his term, because he came up with it and no one's going to take it from him. So that's one thing. Another thing I would like to say about ASEAN is that if Southeast Asia wants to be independent and sovereign nation states, it's very important for ASEAN to have a unilateral standpoint on the South China Sea. This has not happened yet, and so long as it's going on in this way, this is going to break ASEAN. So if ASEAN does not try to come up somehow with a standpoint on the South China Sea, it's going to be irrelevant. So I think this is the key. Thank you.
Because we, for President Trump, showing up is hard to do, right? So he doesn't understand how ASEAN works, right? Based on consultations, processes, There's no, I think he didn't come because there was no decision to be made. There was no deal. There's no decision to be made. ASEAN, you know, so you come and you talk and then you'd have more talk. Now, if ASEAN goes over to the US, I mean, it's dynamic in the election year and beyond the election next year. Where do you see ASEAN-US going?
Well, ASEAN-US, as I said, is on autopilot. It's very important, one of the most important dialogue partner. That will not change. Of course, you know, people on the ground at the official level, they are very active, enthusiastic. The leader can say whatever they like, and I think the State Department's people know exactly what to do. And I put my faith on that official on the ground. So I think it's still very, very firm. But leader will give some kind of what you call commitment further. And I think given the age of US-China strategic competition, I think a little bit push from Trump, you know, is desirable. But then again, it's also blessing in disguise that Trump has no idea about ASEAN. And that he did not mention anything or tweet, you know, that would be the trouble if he mentioned ASEAN. What the hell is that?
You know, when he first came to office, there was a little bit of enthusiasm for Trump from ASEAN because he provided a new kind of direction. Obama was a bit disappointing to the region, and you know, Trump was talking tough on China at the time. And for ASEAN, this is welcome, right? Because I mean, ASEAN liked the US and China to have some tension. Not too much tension, but some tension. On the 28th, in our next event, we will have the Mekong region. This is where you know, the China way is dominant. The China way in Southeast Asia is contested, but the Mekong more dominant. So please stay tuned. Join us if you can. For today, please join me in thanking all of the speakers, Professor Anne-Marie Murphy, Benjamin Zawacki, Dr. Wasana Wongsurawat, Kun Kavi Chongkittavorn for sharing their expertise, their time. It's been a very rich discussion. Thank you very much.